Welcome to the HEARTS Entwined podcast. In this podcast, we'll be having discussions around the secrets which attract lasting, healthy, fulfilling relationships, creating a healthy mindset, and what women should know and understand about men. Introducing your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, relationship expert, trainer, speaker, and best-selling author of the Cupid's Bow technique. Lyn's mission is to have a positive impact in reducing divorce, domestic violence, and suicide.
Welcome to the Hearts Entwined podcast. This is your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts. And today, listeners, I'm excited to say I've got Peggy Walsh on the show. She's a co-parent coach, and we're going to be talking about conflicts mainly and how high conflict and intense conflicts can manifest themselves and how they can be resolved. So welcome, Peggy.
Thanks, Lyn. It's great to be here.
It's brilliant to have you on as well. So just for an introduction, I'd like you to just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what's led you to be doing what you're doing now.
Well, sure. I'm a retired judge. I handled family matters for 18 years. Before that, I was an attorney and I represented children and parents and other caregivers in family court. And now I do have a license to practice law, but I don't practice law. Instead, I bring my experience to people in a different way. I found that as a judge, I had to decide issues like where a child was going to live and how much time she was going to spend with the most important people in her life. And I just wasn't the best person to do that. The people who love the child are the best people to make decisions about her. So as a judge, I might have learned a lot about a family. I might have learned all kinds of things about their lives when they were together, why they separated, how the child does in school when she's with one parent as opposed to the others. And I could use that information to help parents come to an agreement about parenting time and whatever else needed to be sorted out. But, I really wasn't the best person to do that. As much as I would get to know about a family, as much as I would get to care about them, I was still really a stranger. And if you think about it, you don't want a stranger to make decisions about your life. Who does? So, the thing is, we let that happen whenever we don't want to or can't agree with someone we had a very intimate relationship with. And the closer you are to someone, the more upsetting it is when you have an argument, and certainly when you break up. So I try to help people navigate that part of their relationship, the breakup, and how to figure out where the child is going to spend time. And I try to do that in a way that really focuses on the child and on the needs of the parents. Again, in a way that takes the focus off of the betrayal, the hurt, the intense, terrible feelings that they might have about each other, and just go to the place where they're focused on what is happening that is good, what is happening that they want to see improve, and how to get there.
Excellent. So what do you think, I suppose, are the main issues and problems that arise that actually, end up taking people to court? Why is there that communication breakdown, do you think, where people, like you say, were once in a relationship, which obviously, hopefully you would think would be a quite loving one if they produce children, to one where they can't actually be on the same page?
Well, and that's just it. They had a loving relationship. Honestly, the people who came to my court who had very brief relationships were fine. They would come in, they would hammer out a parenting plan, walk away with a court order, it was okay. But the people who were in love or had been in love and had planned to stay together for the rest of their lives, it's very difficult to say, okay, we're not going to do that because you did something absolutely unforgivable to me. And now this is where we are. We're in a courtroom sitting at different tables. And so everything is a problem, of course, right? Everything is a problem. And things that they would have been able to solve if they had remained together, things that always come up for parents. They have to make decisions about their kids, schools, and medical issues, and after school, extracurricular activities. They can't do it now because they're so mad at each other. So they come to court, and things that are little problems have become gigantic problems. And so I would say just the very issue of communication is it snowballs into, I'm never talking to you again. I'm not going to answer your text messages. I mean, just for a quick example, one couple who had recently separated came in, the father came in to say, the mother's not letting me see my son anymore. And the mother said, yeah, that's right. Because when my son is with his father, the father does not communicate with me. And I want to know what's going on with my kid. And the father says, well, she texts me practically every hour. She wants to know what I fed him. She wants to know what time he went to bed. She wants to know what time he woke up. She's texting me constantly. And I had it. So yeah, I just said, forget it. I didn't text her at all. I'm not talking to her now. And so what was really going on, of course, is that they had recently separated. The father had not spent a lot of time alone with the child doing those little, caregiving things, making dinner and, getting him up for school in the morning. And so the mother was so worried and all of that and constantly, just over communicating. And the father was very upset because he said, this is my son. I can take care of him. And the mother actually agreed that he could. She was just so worried about it. So what ultimately happened was the mother said, no, I know he can. I know he can. And the father said, look, I get that this is new for her. She doesn't really know that I can. So yeah, of course we can talk while the child is there. They just had to, create some boundaries and how many times is appropriate. And, so in other words, people who are so upset about the breakup can't communicate about the smallest things. So the smallest things become, like, well, what did you feed Bobby for dinner? I'm not telling you. Well, okay. And you understand that, right? Because it's gotten to a place where it's impossible. But it's not a big deal because what he fed Bobby for dinner was fine. Everybody was okay with it. And so move on, right?
And also, I mean, and not to be sort of stereotypical, but quite often the different genders play a part in how they want to parent a child, and that's why we are different. We're not the same as men. We are different to men, and what can feel appropriate to the mother might not feel appropriate in terms of how he might want to do something. I had a really funny experience with one of my clients who said that she just had to surrender to the fact that when she went away, or for whatever reason, I can't remember now, that her husband was capable, and regardless of how he did things, she just have to relinquish that control and just let him do it his way. And one of the things was, she'd give the kids a bath time at bedtime, just before bedtime, and what he did was he hose piped them in the hall on the back garden.
Right. So she had to decide whether she was going to die on that hill and make it, something that was never going to be resolved and they were going to fight about all the time, or she wasn't going to go away, or something like that. Or just say, okay, well, I guess they got clean, so that's the point. Right. But
probably more fun doing it as well.
A lot more fun doing it, right? But certainly not certainly different methods. Certainly different methods. And you're right. Parents just have different ideas of what's right and wrong, and they're usually wrong that there is a right way and a wrong way. There's usually lots of ways that are perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of ways, and as I say, quite often that's to do with the different genders that we are. Women do things one way, and men might do it another way. And like you say, you have to decide. Is this the hill you're going to die on? Or are we going to just sort of relinquish control and just say, what?
Right.
I trust him to load the dishwasher regardless of how he does it. Even if he doesn't do it the same way as I do it.
Yeah, absolutely. You just recognize that there's a difference between you and your ex-husband or wife, and if there's a problem, there's a problem. But if it's just that it's different, that's not necessarily a problem.
No, exactly. And I think sometimes we can get bogged down on the small stuff, can't we? And there's a great saying, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's so true.
It is true. It is true. And that, that also happens in family court a lot. People come in, and when they're angry with each other, the small stuff is what they sweat. There's usually, good parents are good parents. They're not really sweating about the big stuff. They're not saying, well, when, my daughter's with her mother, she doesn't go to school. So that's a big thing that they ought to be talking about. It's not, I shouldn't say it's never that, but it's typically not that. And they snipe at each other because it has nothing to do with, bath time or what was for dinner. It has to do with their relationship. So if they can understand that, and then they realize that they are sweating small stuff and they're spending lots and lots of money doing it and lots of time and energy doing it, they usually just say, okay, let's not do this anymore. This is ridiculous. We trust each other about the kid. I believe you love the kid. You believe I love the kid. Let's not keep going to court about these small little things that makes us both and the child crazy. And once they can do that, everybody can move on pretty harmoniously and then figure out what the big stuff, how to deal with the big stuff.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of truth in hurt people, don't they? And we lash out usually at the people that we actually shouldn't be lashing out at. It's just because we're in a hurt place ourselves.
Oh, there's no question about that. There's no question about that. And that's a main lesson that I learned and that I try to help people with. When a person is always talking about the other person, like all the terrible things that they did. And, especially if there was cheating, betrayal, something like that, then you feel like you misjudged that person. And it's a very, very hard time. But when you make somebody the villain and you talk about how terrible that one thing was that they did, or that 20 things, or that they did, then you're putting spotlight on that person and all those terrible things. And you feel bad and you feel upset. And yes, you're hurting that person and you're hurting your child by the constant fighting, but you're hurting yourself as well. And that's what I really noticed, is that people could take their power back from the person who they, was driving them crazy, and the person who had done terrible things to them, or they thought, or they perceived it, or they had done terrible things like that, but not in terms of parenting and not in terms of the human being they really are. They made a mistake, or, something happened. But the bottom line is, yes, hurt people, and that can go on forever. And then everybody is much more miserable than anybody has to be. So that's what I try to help people do, is, stop, because people start feeling helpless because the other person is completely in control. As much as they say, oh, he's so terrible, and listen to this and listen to this and listen to this, when they stopped talking about that person, they regained the power of, well, where is the attention focused? I want to talk about my kid and the good things that are happening with my kid, or I want to talk about my life. Frankly, I would like to start being happy, and I can't be happy if I keep talking about this person and the terrible thing that he did. And by the way, my friends and family are going to be so glad that I stopped talking about this person practically all day, every day. It keeps it going. It keeps it going for everybody. It's just misery just keeps it going. And then when people, perpetuating it. And then when people decide that they've had enough, they can really move on with their lives in things just get easier and more peaceful, which Absolutely. I think is really what everybody wants.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree, 100% that we need, if we feel like we're focusing on somebody else, then really what we're doing is giving our power to that person or that situation or that behavior, aren't we? And allowing them to have even more negative impact on our lives, rather than bringing the focus to ourselves and realizing, I'm going to take responsibility for my own happiness.
That's exactly right. And then, sometimes people feel like, well, then I'm giving in. Well, no, you're not giving in. You're not giving away your power. As you say, you're taking it back. People can make a decision that they want peace in their lives. And once they do that, they become in charge of how they want things to go. And then, instead of focusing on winning in court and twisting the other person's arm until they give in, they get to the bottom of what they really want, and then they go forward that way. And then things just calm down a lot for everyone. And children often know what's going on to some degree or other. Sometimes a lot, and sometimes just enough to make it upsetting. And
Yeah.
so these things are not good for kids. They're not good for the adults. And then you take it to the next level of, wow, I'm also hurting my child. There's a big incentive to try to stop having high conflict episodes with the other person that you have to keep having a relationship with. You know, this isn't a marriage that people want to stay in. This is usually I never want to see that person again in my life, and yet I am going to be talking to this person just about every day for the rest of my life, or you know, for a long, long time anyway. So,
what do you think to the reason as to why it's become more prevalent that we're separating and divorcing at earlier ages and more frequently these days?
so I think people have learned that they have a right to be happy, that they don't have to stay in a relationship that makes them unhappy. I think there's much more economic freedom for women than there used to be. So women are able to leave a marriage when in previous decades they were not able to do that economically. They had to stay with the person who was bringing in the money, and they didn't have a way of supporting themselves. I mean, that's obviously a generalization, but yeah, I think people say, hey, this isn't doing it for me anymore, and so I'm leaving. And I mean, that can be good and bad because, you know, it's upsetting and it's a lot of heartache, usually for both people. On the other hand, if a relationship isn't working, it's good to just get out of it and say, okay, we tried, and now let's move on and try to have happy lives ourselves independently, and then also together with our child. So
Yeah, I absolutely understand and 100% agree with what you've just said, because I think probably we put too much pressure on ourselves. You know, obviously we don't go into our long-term relationships thinking it's ever going to end badly. I think nobody has that intention, you know. So,
right.
but you know, to have the till death us do part, you know, it's quite rare these days, and great, you know, and good on you if you manage to maintain a happy, good relationship till the death that you depart, and especially
Yeah.
if you're married at a young age. But I also feel that, you know, there's a lot of pressure sometimes to fulfill that, and we stay in our relationships far longer than what we should have done, because we're actually miserable those last few years before we actually take the courage to leave.
Oh, I agree. I agree. And I think it's hard for people to determine when too long is too long. You know, they stay and they try, and then it's hard to say, well, is now the right time to leave? Should we keep going? Should we keep going? And I think that's where professionals come in, counselors, therapists, you know, where people can get a, you know, not their sisters or their best friend's opinion on things, but somebody who's really trained to get to the bottom of what's going on with that person who wants to leave, and get to the place where the right decision is made at the right time. I think that's, you know, that's probably the best thing anybody can do, is just go talk to some kind of counselor.
I absolutely support that advice. I feel, you know, sometimes even, I mean, for me, in my situation, I was with my ex-husband for 23 years, and that wasn't a toxic relationship. You
Hmm.
know, we were happy, but,
Hmm.
you know, I just felt I was settling for an okay relationship in the end. You know, it would just become, you know, routine, I suppose, and I didn't feel like we was both on the same page, and the relationship had run its course. So when I did have that conversation with him, it really devastated him, because, you know, as I say, he's a good man, good father. My daughters were devastated, and you know, I caused the biggest trauma and drama in their lifetime, I think, you know, on the back of making that decision. But it just felt like, you know, I needed to, because I wasn't happy for whatever reason. And, you know, it took me a while to sort of figure out, once I'd actually separated, actually, that, you know, why I'd got to that point. And I think, you know, for me, it was just a case of, I felt very safe in that relationship. And, you know, for me, that was a top priority for those years. But then I come to a point where it wasn't enough anymore just to feel safe.
Yes, that's right. And safety is probably the number one consideration for human beings, for everybody, right? You have to feel safe. And that can look like all kinds of things, but the bottom line is safety. And so if you have to stay in a relationship again because you need to have food on the table to feel safe and secure, or whatever the issue is, then you have to stay. But then sometimes people realize they can be safe outside of the relationship without that person being their spouse or partner. So I think that's probably it, right? You realize that you could be safe without that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes safety also means, you need to feel comfortable and happy. And happiness is not nothing. It's so I think sometimes we say, oh, kids these days, all they want to do is it's all about their happiness, but it should be about duty and all of that. But if you're not happy, that's going to infiltrate everything.
Yes.
And it does. And I'm guessing your kids also experienced your unhappiness as well as and so I don't know, but kids pick up on things that from people who are important to them. And you're also setting examples for children. When you stay in a relationship that you don't want to stay in, that's what they're going to think about when they are in that place too. Well, my mom stayed, she didn't want to, but she stayed. Well, so that's what I should do. And do you want that for your kids? I mean, I kind of think about it that way too. If you really love a young person, you want them to just leave, no, you're not happy. You go and you find something that's going to make you happy. So,
absolutely.
yeah. And it's hard to hurt another person. It's very hard to do that.
It is, especially, as I say, he was a very good man. He still is a good man, obviously, and a good father, a good husband. So it wasn't really, what I couldn't point the finger at him and say, you did this, you did that, you did the other, because he never did. It was just me that sort of had worked on myself and had grown into a different person. I was healing a lot of stuff from my previous teen trauma, and I just got to a point where I felt like, is this relationship really what I want at the moment? And it wasn't, and it was very, very difficult. It took me probably a good couple of years to pluck up the courage to say something, because there wasn't any strong reason, there wasn't any fidelity or anything like that for me to hang my hat on, so to speak. It was third parties involved from my point of view. There wasn't anything, so it was very, very hard, very, very hard.
It is very hard. That's probably the hardest thing. It is much easier to say, well, this is what you did and now I can go. But chances are that this is what you did, whatever that thing is, infidelity or some other issue, is just going to be one reason why you decide to leave. Because if you can't or don't want to work through something with your spouse or partner, there's probably a reason for that. So, and I'm not saying that people who have infidelity in their situation should stay at all. I don't mean that at all. I just mean that sometimes there is a big thing and people do hang their hat on it, but it's really not just that. So when there's nothing to point at, that doesn't really mean that you're any different from lots of people who leave for that reason that they can point to.
And that was so hard, because obviously then it was a case of, he said, well, it would have been easier for him if I had been having an affair, because then he could actually, feel like there was a good reason for why I wanted to end the relationship. So I felt like, I couldn't do that to him, because he was a good guy, and I didn't want to, have a relationship outside of our marriage. I wanted to sort of end that relationship first before I moved on and looked for or attracted a new relationship. So I actually thought I was being, very respectful, but actually he said it was harder to take, which I hadn't thought of.
Of course, because if you look at the other person, oh, well, that's I understand why she's attracted to him. And then, okay, so I see. So she wants to be with him instead of me. He has these things going on. And I guess I'm not like that. But if you don't have the other person to look at, you're kind of looking in the mirror and saying, what's the matter with me? Why am I inadequate? Why am I so bad? I mean, I'm that bad that you can't stand to be with me? Yeah, that is a terrible feeling, and a terrible feeling to inflict. And yet, I think when we care about people, things can work out. Things can
Yeah.
work out, which is to say that those terrible feelings of rejection and hurt can be can change. They don't have to stay forever. I don't know what happened
He
with
did,
your ex,
about
but
18 months later, he did meet somebody else. And also in the meantime, I'd met somebody else as well. So he did recover from that. But
yeah,
obviously, initially, it was a big shock because I'd had time, obviously, to grieve for the relationship, I suppose, whilst I was
yeah,
still in it, whereas he hadn't.
right. No question. No question. Right. It was easier for you in that respect because you knew what was coming and he didn't. So he had to grieve the end of something, and you were grieving the prospect of leaving and not having that person. But if he met somebody else, then maybe ultimately this was the right thing for him also to leave
Yeah,
your relationship.
I hope so because unfortunately, he didn't want to remain in an amicable friendship with me after we ended things. But
Mhm.
as far as I know, he's still happy and in that relationship. So I'm trusting that he now sees there was a silver lining.
Yes, yes, of course, of course. How are your daughters doing with it?
Well, hard for me to say, but they've been estranged from me now for the last 14, 15 years since it happened.
Hmm.
They won't have anything to do with me.
Oh, that's
So that
so.
so that's the situation there. They were nearly 17 and 19 at the time where I left. So they're in the mid 30s now, early 30s. One's nearly 33, the other one's nearly 35 now, and they just won't have anything to do with me because of that.
Oh, that's very sad. That's very sad. And I do wonder, as I said, if they have a relationship where that's fine, but not good, not good enough, if they will think about this is how mom felt, this is how mom felt, this is how it was for her, and she left. I still think you have to do what's right for you and set that example for your children, whether they recognize that or not. But I hope that they get some help with this because, by the way, that's not good for them to harbor this feeling of I don't want to talk to my mother. I mean, that has to be very hard for them. And but again, their father could have been, I hope, maybe has been helpful to them. I don't know. I don't know what's going on, of course, but it's his responsibility too. They're his kids too,
True.
and he try to make them, I mean, help them to see uh, what is a better way. And not talking to your parents is not a good way.
I agree, but the thing is that we can't have any control over that, can we? It's been very
No, we
hard and
can't.
very tough at times to navigate, but I've just had to learn to again sort of relinquish the fact that I can't control how they feel or what they want to do, in this situation. So I just trust that one day there'll be some sort of reconciliation. I just didn't really factor in that it might take this long and it's still ongoing.
I think that's what happens, and it is so hard. I certainly know those situations where the parent didn't really do anything so terrible, and yet they were so connected to that event, or they are so connected to the other parent's grief that they just can't. They might not harbor any terrible feelings toward the parent they're not talking to, but they just can't figure out a way to reconcile. Again, that's where you just hope that people get some help from professionals who know how to give it, and that
Absolutely.
reconciliation is really in the future.
We can trust that. So, Peggy, just on a final note before we wrap things up, what's the best way that people can get in touch with you and connect with you in relation to how to navigate breakups and conflicts in relationships when it comes to co-parenting?
But an email is probably the easiest way. So Peggy at thecoparentcoach.com. And I also help people through proceedings. As I said, I'm not practicing law, and I don't substitute my opinion for a lawyer's opinion, whether you have one or not. But sometimes I can help people just who are going through a family court or divorce, just to sort of let them understand what the judge might be thinking and how the process might go. So I do that as well, whether kids are involved or not, just to have, another person to talk to that it's not legal advice, and it's not mental health counseling. It's just, when I was a judge, this was how I saw things. Maybe the judge in your case is seeing things that way as well. That kind of thing.
Yes, and it's an important service, absolutely. So any final words of wisdom around this topic of navigating breakups around high intense conflicts that may arise, whilst you're co-parenting?
Well, as we said, some problems are just not that big. And you have to break down what's happening with you or what's happening with the other person that is escalating everything and making a small problem like, what is my ex John feeding Bobby for dinner turn into I'm not letting Bobby see John anymore, or John saying I'm never letting the mother talk to the child while things just escalate. And break it down and try to think about what's really going on in your relationship. You don't have to be honest with the other person. You don't have to say, here, I'm just feeling really hurt about what you did. You don't have to do that. You just have to notice what's going on with yourself, with your own issues, with your own feelings. What's happening here? And then maybe you can just bring things down a notch so you're not so upset, and just focus on this in a way that's more real than imagined, because we do that. We say, okay, this is what happened, but our imaginations take over, and we create situations that make us afraid and upset, and they don't need to. So
absolutely, 100% agree. So thank you very much for that wonderful words of wisdom that you've shared there, Peggy. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much.
I have too. Thank you.
So just leaves me to say that true love starts with opening our hearts. And until next time, goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Hearts Entwined podcast. You can follow Lyn via the Facebook group 2 Hearts Entwined, or search Lyn Smith, inspirational speaker, at LinkedIn, or email lyn@hearts-entwined.com. That's LYN@hearts-entwined.com. Remember, true love starts with opening our hearts.